This is Breaking MedTech. I am Ryan. This is Cope. We're going to try to help people. What'd you say? Get better today?
Let's get a little bit better today.
Let's get a little bit better. It's every day. A little bit of progress.
Something to my old hoops coach, but that's what we're going to do. We're going to get better today. We're going to get. Let's go do it. So hit them with the intro, and let's get them better.
All right. So today we're going to talk about getting a beachhead, which is something that all you military buffs out there, you know what we're talking about. But it's the concept of, if you're a small medical device company, obviously you think your product is better than everybody else. You got to have that confidence. And you want to go into every hospital and enterprise sell, right? Like, oh, this hospital has 15 hospitals in the network. We're closing all of them tomorrow. Not the case, not how it works. It would be nice, but
I like the attitude, and I like the long-term goal.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to talk about how you get there.
Yeah. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Cope. This is your baby.
Well, yeah. Let's talk about. So here's the rationale behind the analogy: get a beachhead. And as you know, Ryan, I like to read and study history a little bit.
You talk about it all the time.
Yeah. It's so 80 years ago, basically World War II. We have to go take Berlin to win Europe, right? World War II. And the goal, undoubtedly, is we must get to Berlin to win the war. But to start in June of 1944, we really had to get across the English Channel, and we had to get a beachhead at Normandy. And if anybody's seen Saving Private Ryan, you probably feel like you were there, right? If you've seen it. But that's getting a beachhead. Now, Eisenhower was Operation Overlord, right? But on V-Day or 2, nobody was going, well, what's the deal? How come we're not in Berlin? Because they knew they had to get to Normandy and then into France and then across the river into Germany and then to Berlin, right? No doubt about it that was their end goal. But you got to start where you can start. And that was getting people into Europe by boat and by plane. Right? So that's your beachhead. And that's what, and I'll give you an example of one I had earlier this week that I thought, we won't name the company or the rep, but it was a great conversation I had with this rep. So that's what we mean. It doesn't mean that, hey, when we get on the beach, mission accomplished, because what the goal is converting every case that belongs theoretically to the rationale of our product design, right? Does that make sense, right? Was that an okay explanation of a beachhead?
It was a great explanation. I was imagining Saving Private Ryan. That opening scene is brutal. You know who it was more brutal for? The people who were there. So,
right.
Yeah, no, it makes complete sense. I know you get a little bit annoyed when I ask this question, but like, why do you think most companies struggle with this concept? Because they do. Right.
Well, I don't know. I don't know exactly why, but I've seen it 100 times, and it sounds like this. Our product is clearly better than the one they're using. If they see it and like it and want to try it, our expectation is that they just convert all of ours or all of theirs that they're currently using with our competitor, not using, like we're 2 hours, because it's logical, right? And so, I'll give you an example. I'll show this in the example that we talk about from this one I got from this rep for a sternal closure device, right? But I do think like that's the founders, I think, especially in medtech, tend to be engineers, and right, like, and that's not a shot, but they tend to think like, well, obviously they've tried it, they like it, they're happy. We can expect all of them to switch now, right? And you're like, not really, not yet. We're going to get there, but we're not there yet. This is going to take a couple of steps, and they kind of know it, but they really have a hard time accepting it. And they also confuse, for instance, me saying, hey, we're going to start here, then we're going to end up there. They confuse that with me not believing their product is better. That's a whole different conversation. Don't you think?
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on, and I think you nailed it. It's like it's this blend of I think my product is better, maybe never being in sales before, maybe being in sales but not being in sales for a very long, like being like on the front line in a very long time. Where I do think back in the day, it may have been easier to convert somebody like completely.
Yeah. Well,
I
I
just
just
don't.
know.
I don't think that's the case today.
Yeah,
And
and we shouldn't. I'm not. By the way, just as a side, I'm not using this to be condescending
mhm.
to founders who don't understand this. When I was a young salesperson, I didn't understand this. I
Yeah,
was like, why aren't they switching? It's clearly better. Why are they even using that other product now? Right? Like,
what are they,
so this is a
idiots?
sales thing too. Yeah. Right. So I don't, this is things I've learned over time, you've experienced over time, that we say like, hey, it's interesting from the top of the company, you're the inventor, founder, whatever. But understand, salespeople have to learn this too,
I
unless they're really, really
I
gifted, that they
I
just
will,
get it intuitively.
and it's I will tell you like small all the small people out there, small companies out there. Like this is also something that you see in corporate. Like don't feel like let me pick on corporate bros for a second. Like this is the exact type of thing that I would expect to hear from like a senior vice president or a senior vice president of sales at like a Fortune 500 medical device company who I'm going to be kind of mean for a second, like went to went to Notre Dame, graduated from Notre Dame, went to another really good school. Maybe we're going to pick Stanford for a second. Got an MBA from Stanford, came in, never actually worked a day in sales in their life, but they're very good at like big picture strategy stuff because that's
Yeah.
typically who goes and becomes senior vice presidents at these companies. And there's some who, have worked in the trenches, and then the other half that haven't worked in the trenches, and the other half that haven't worked in the trenches are the ones going like, why haven't you guys converted 100% of the business? Ours is better. And
Yeah.
that's where like you and every other seasoned rep who's spent 20 years in the field go like, what is he like? He's
What are they
29.
nuts?
Shut up.
Yeah. Well, let me give you the example because you're absolutely right. But let's put an example next to it.
Okay,
And
yeah.
I'll show you where they get confused because you've seen this a bunch of times, right? So I talked to this rep earlier this week, and I won't name the company or the rep, but he was telling me there's a new sternal closure device. It's just what you use to repair the sternum after open heart surgery, right? And there's a couple different ways to fix it. You can use cerclage wire, which is basically wire that you close your bread with, right? It's wires, tighten it up, cinch it, and you put 3 or 4 across the sternum to reapproximate the sternum back. It's like you create a fracture and then you heal it, right? But because these patients who get these types of procedures oftentimes are older, sicker, diabetic, smoker, their bone quality isn't great. And so sometimes you have to actually use plating systems that are designed for multiple points of fixation. I think probably this makes sense to most of our audience. It's way more expensive, but in those clinical applications, you need something because if you use cerclage wire in a lot of those patients, their sternum comes apart, and there's a really high incidence of both morbidity but also mortality, right? Like those people have what's known as a dehiscence, and 50% of them die within 30 days, right? So this is a significant clinical problem. This company has come out with sort of a third generation design that lets you use it in those patients whose bone is really soft. It shines there, but you could use it in any of those examples. And here's the example this guy gave to me from a patient population. He's like, Cope, CT surgeons, busy ones, do 400 hearts a year. He's like, 250 of them, they're going to cerclage wire them. It costs $10 a wire maybe. They'll put 5 of them in. And it's good, it's fast, it's effective. That's not really the patient population we're talking about, although ours would work. He said, so of that 400, 250 really aren't our target market, right? But he said there's 150 that they plate. And he's like, that's kind of our target. That's actually our goal market. But he said, and I'm making a guess here. I'm like, well, how many of those do you think like you would be better in of those 150? And he said, oh, right off the top of my head, it's somewhere between 25 to 50 of them, right? Where we know this makes sense clinically. And I'm thinking, like, okay, we're getting really close to his beachhead. This is the beachhead that the ultimate is the 150. Now, look, I know some founders are going to be like, hey, man, the ultimate Berlin is 400. We should get all those, right? And I'm like, okay, maybe. But let's win where we can win today, right? So I would actually tell him, though, if it's 50 that you think you're going to clearly be better in the minds of the customer, because that's what matters.
Mm-hmm.
The beachhead might actually, I would say, this is me personally, my beachhead is the first 3 of those 50 patients that we think the customer's like, this is where I'd use it because this is a problem. Our cases are slow. It's an issue. They're much higher rate of coming back. I would love to use your product right there, right? That's my beachhead, and the beachhead specifically, the toehold, if you will, are the next 3 that we can get, right? And that's where I want to start. And I think that's knowing, and this is where the founders get, oh, we should be 150. We should be doing at least 10 of these a month. And you're like doing 1 every other month, right? Mm-hmm. I'm like, we're going to get there, my friend. But I plan on getting the 150 too. Mm-hmm. But it's going to take a little time. Let's go earn it, right? Mm-hmm. Let's go earn that. So does that make sense, Ryan? Like, from an example?
No, it makes perfect sense. I know when we were talking about it before, I came up with like 3 other things that like I've seen firsthand. That's the approach that we should have taken. I would say the reminder for everyone out there is like, well, how do you get from 50 to 150? Is it like that? Then you become, that's not account management. You're still selling. Right.
Right.
But that's where it's like every time, like, I don't think a lot of these companies, I know they say in theory, like, oh, we want to wow the customer when we get our foot in the door. Okay. But like, that's where, like, let's say you get the 50. All right. That's where your job to get to 150 is not solely like, you cannot go in with the mindset of like, well, they're just going to naturally see that this is so much better, right?
And some do, but most do not, right? Like, because they think algorithmically. So I'm going to interrupt you for a second because I think it makes part of your point that you're about to go to, which is doctors are trained, and most humans are trained to think algorithmically. So they go cerclage wire for the easy ones, plating for the scarier ones, and your product cope, it's awesome for the really, really, really scary ones, right? That's how they algorithm it.
Yeah.
And they're not crazy. They're not. They're actually really smart.
Yeah. And if you and then your job is
my job.
Yeah, your job as a salesperson is
and your
if you're
job
trying
as a marketing dude.
Yeah, and my job is like in those scenarios, you already have the customer. So that's where these companies, I think, have to start thinking about, like, you have to look at like account-based and enterprise selling, and you should go look at like your brothers and sisters in tech, who do stuff like enterprise selling is like a true, like you go look at some of the account-based selling and the account-based marketing stuff that some of those companies do and like use it as a reference point. But like, that's where you're going, like, you're taking notes of like, well, are they closing faster? Are cases taking less time? Are those patients doing much better? And you slowly take all of that information and then you work towards that 150. We get that the 150 is the most important part, but you got to walk before you run.
Exactly. And to use another good metaphor, frankly.
And you have to, and like, I know this is, I don't know how many, call me ignorant. I don't know every, no, I want you to call me ignorant. I don't know every specialty and every, like, let's say in a geographical area like the Lehigh Valley, how many of these surgeons are in that territory? With their, you could tell me. Like, I don't know.
I actually don't know, but I would guess 20,
Okay. So if there's
maybe
20,
less. Right?
like if there's 20, like, and you're a company and you're trying to like tackle this, like your goal should be that all 20 surgeons in that area are using you for those 50, right?
Right. Right.
Your goal, like,
and yeah,
it's
exactly.
your goal is to get all 20 of those surgeons. You want to get to that 400 number. You're not going to convert somebody realistically to do 150 right off the bat. But what you can do is convert as many of those surgeons to get towards those hard to use ones, and then you systematically work them towards the larger number.
Right, which goes to some of our discussions here about here's how the salesperson should be looking at that. And I think so. I've got this surgeon. We do our first 3 or 4 cases. The cases go great. I need to make sure, and I told you, I took this quote from LinkedIn from this woman. I don't know her, Christy McGinn. She wrote, "It's not about innovation or invention. A lot of times it's about adoption," right? Mm-hmm. I have got this person to adopt this to start to make sure it works. As they get good feedback, as they see patients back and they're doing well, it's now a great time to say to them, "Hey, so do you feel like this is your go-to in that subset of patients that what you and I have described as the 50, mm-hmm. like those 50 really scary patients, right? If they are like, yeah, I like it. What I still want to do is make sure they're like, I want to make sure I become their go-to there. It's happy, patients doing well, questions. And then when they're like, hey, yeah, listen, I do it. I've done 20 of these patients are doing great. Now I'm starting to think and maybe say, hey, you know what we have found with a lot of surgeons is when they get to this point and they really like it for that they start to go, could I use this in that other 100 that are less scary because I like it's faster, it's lower profile, it's whatever it is. I don't like plating. I got to admit, I never thought about it in those. But like that's where you start to build within that customer, right? Mm-hmm. And it's a different message. Now, I'm using my metaphor. Now I'm somewhere in France using the World War II Europe, right? Now we're winning, we've answered, helped them with a problem that they had. Mm-hmm. And now we're on to Berlin. And as they get more and more success, success breeds success. Does that make sense to you the way I think about it?
No, 1,000%. And it goes back to the t-shirt that I'm eventually going to make, which is solve their problem, not yours, right? Yes,
like we have to get those.
Solve their problem, not yours. That's all you have to do. If you solve their problem, it will eventually solve your problem. But you got to solve their problem first. And if their problem is the really hard to do ones, then solve that problem. And then if it makes sense, if it makes sense, they'll use it more. And you have to walk them to that point. And here's the other part that I would really hammer with all of these founders who think they have the ones who are going like, we have 400 who should we should be used in all 400. I know you think you should be used in all 400. That doesn't mean the market thinks that you should be all used in all 400. And sometimes you're right, and sometimes the market is right. And you have to understand that that's a realistic thing, is that just because you want to be used in all 400 doesn't mean it makes sense to be used in all 400.
Right. I think, by the way, the beachhead, I like this, it should be defined as their problem that you can solve right now. And do they even know they have a problem? So that's probably where beachhead meets customer. Yeah. Right. So that's what and it's funny, just on the sales side to close this, I've gone to listen, you love mine for this patient. Awesome. This type, we are winning in those really scary patients. And I've said to certain surgeons, hey, so would you ever consider using this instead of plating? And sometimes they're like, nah, not really. I like, that's, and 6 months later, they change because I'm like, well, these guys did it. And they hadn't. We have to help or do our best to help those customers mature in our minds to the next stage, right? You can't just assume A, that they're always going to see this, and B, that they're going to do it the minute they've achieved success in the first set.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that?
You're introducing what my best friend Donald Miller would call like a story loop, right? So like when you say, let's say you got them to that first part, okay? And they are like, yeah, we're using it. I'm using it for these 50. I love it, whatever. And you're like, hey, would you ever think about using it inside of plating, right? And you're opening a story, right? And it'd be like, would you ever use it for those, maybe the next 25 or the next 50 that like, plate seems to go good, but maybe it doesn't go well during the case, or like you're not really as happy. And then what is going to happen, right? You've opened a story loop, and at that point they might go like, no, I don't think so, or no, probably not, or like, maybe I would think about it. But like you're in the middle, and you could, if you have some other people like, hey, we've seen some people do it, and you can give some data and everything. And then here's the 6-month thing that's going to happen. Sometime during that 6 month, one of those 100 cases that they do with a plate,
right,
is going to, if you have kids in the car, cover their ears, is going to go to absolute shit. Or we'll go World War II, FUBAR. And what they're going to have to do is abandon what they're doing and go to your system. And that is where you can convert, because at some point you've introduced it into their mind, and Murphy's Law, something's going to happen, and you're going to now be able to take over that. You have to be prepared. You have to have everything. But like, that's how it typically happens.
Yeah,
is
exactly.
There's selling, there's talking, there's doing like.
And here's my old man veteran sales trick or tip that I would say. Young Cope would say to a doctor, hey, so what do you think about using this in these patients? And most of the time they'd be like, not exactly the best response. What older grizzled Cope learned was to talk to other surgeons that are already doing that. Could be in a different part of the country, different part of the state, see them at a conference, whatever. And I would say, hey, listen, when you started using these patients, what made you do that? And they would say, well, I had one go to shit. Pardon my French again.
Probably
we are in Normandy into France, right?
Oui.
So, and they're like, and I finally was like, wait a minute. Or my rep had been saying something to me, and then we had one of these cases, and I was like, oh my gosh, why don't I just do this all the time? And then when I now go talk to my customers, I'm like, hey, a lot of surgeons go start here, and they use it for and it's a smart place. You use it to solve that problem. They're really scary patients. But a lot of them are starting to convert the kind of scary patients, I'll call them, into this too, because here's what they're saying to me. They're saying they've had this happen, and they had a patient go to this and that, and you can watch those surgeons start to go, oh yeah, I've had that happen too. And you're like, well, that's where people like you have thought, maybe it makes sense to use mine, right? And I tell them, you're the expert. You should do what you think is clinically best, but this is what, and now they're thinking about it. Now they still look, they're the customer. They reserve the right to tell me no, right? That's okay. But I have gone and used people like them as opposed to me telling them, because that surgeon has credibility, right? I have credibility. They have way more. So I do think, like, as you want to try to get some customer in anything to another stage, you should always talk to them about it. You should always give them a rationale. But a lot of times what's much more compelling is someone like them who's already made that change and you utilizing their story to start another story loop. I like that. I didn't realize that. So that was just my veteran sales tip.
No, and it makes sense. And I want to tie this up, but I would tell you, like, don't just think this has to do with like specific products like this, right? And a great example would be, I'm going to rattle off a couple companies, free advertising. Right. ASR. I always told you I have to get a shout out to my dad every single time. ASR, right? My dad's goal is to get it somewhere into that hospital, and then
get a beachhead.
Get a beachhead, and then expand from there. Hey, could you use it in these cases? Could you use it, and if it is like, hey, they need to have it in, if you're in I don't know, like ASR, you could literally use it if you needed to, like in the emergency department, if somebody has a gunshot or like, and they're just right? If that's the first place you can get it in, and then expand it from there, right? If you were doing one tray, right? Our goal when we were selling one tray was like fix the problem and then expand it from there. If you were doing, and like cross-functional, you had multiple products, right? Or you had one surgeon that converted and you had other surgeons in their practice. The goal is to convert one surgeon and then use that as a way to convert the other surgeons. Or if you have multiple products.
That's a really good point. Yeah, a customer can be a beachhead.
Yeah, a customer could be a beachhead. Or you gave an example a couple weeks ago about a podiatry company. It was right? Like get one product in and then you're building credibility that your products actually work, right? It can be used in a whole bunch of different ways. It doesn't just have to be in, sometimes it's if you're in a hospital network, convert one hospital, prove that it works in that one hospital, and then expand to the other hospitals in the network. Right? Yeah. It's a concept that you just have to be okay with taking one battle at a time and expanding it from there. But you don't get from Normandy to Berlin without systematically. It doesn't happen by luck. I'll tell you that. It's hard work. It's doing stuff. And that's what we want you get your foot in the door, and then you have to systematically work to get to the end.
I like that. So, Ryan, let's wrap it up. The beachhead, I think you really defined it well. The beachhead is where you're meeting the customers and you're meeting them where their big burning problem is right now, knowing that ultimately you can help them with other things, but you have to build towards that. Yeah. That's why CT surgeons don't flip everything to this new product because it's better, because that's not how they're trained. That's not how they think. And that's actually not how human beings think. They say, solve the problem now. And sometimes they apply it to other things, but oftentimes they have to be gently persuaded or to think about it. Right. So I really like that. Thank you for letting me talk about this, because I think this is key to sales and marketing in everything. And hopefully this helps the people who listen to us think a little bit more systematically about this. Because it's the way we have to do it. And hopefully did we get a little bit better today?
I think I did. Yeah. It's like a therapy session. Actually. Yeah. So, all right. Well, that's Breaking MedTech. Yeah. You sent me, I thought it was good. I was going to send you a bill, but all right. All right. This is Breaking MedTech.
Hey, we'll see you soon.
Bye.